If you're new to this series, I suggest you check out the previous videos before watching this one. The link is in the description. The last time we left the Fellowship, we were discussing the scene between Gandalf and Frodo, and we were elaborating on the interplay between light and dark, with the introduction of Gollum and the foreshadowing of Frodo's state should he fail on his quest. Today we're going to talk about the best sequence in the film and how it builds tension so effectively. It increases the stakes in the story, and the execution based on the time period is just so impressive with what the tools the filmmakers had to work with. Hi, I'm Omz, and welcome to OmzLaw. If you're new to the channel, you know the drill. Like and subscribe and comment if you enjoyed the video, thereby helping me make more content like this. And without wasting time, let's dive right in. We've been critiquing the plot structure of Fellowship of the Ring, and we are almost at the midpoint of the second half of the second act, arriving to another rising action, sometimes referred to as the crisis. However, I don't think this is the crisis for this film, and I've left a link to one of my other videos that discusses plot structure if you guys want to check that out. I think the Fellowship of the Ring has a different plot structure than most films, with a much larger third act than other films tend to have. So Gimli finds out what we've all been expecting, and Gandalf terrifies everyone by reading the final words written by someone suffering the fate of this attack. And of course, in order for the plot to happen, the hobbits have to call attention to themselves.
Fool of a took! Throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity.
You must have noticed by now a recurrent pattern with this technique. Tolkien and the filmmakers highlight the importance of the hobbits this way and how they govern the events in the story. This happens several times in the other films. It's quite recurrent that the hobbits decide the fate of Middle-earth and the characters inside it. And we are finally introduced to our first action battle scene. This is what makes the Fellowship stand out. It economizes on its battles. There are only two present in the film, and the others are pretty small fights or skirmishes that occur. But in this scene, we get to see all of the characters show their might. And so we are introduced to a cave troll, and the Fellowship has to fight him off. I just want to pause for a bit and comment on the difficulty of shooting this scene. I would like to remind the audience that this film was shot in the early 2000s or late 90s. So the filmmakers had to pre-visualize all these shots before actually shooting them. Pre-visualization is the process by which filmmakers go into heavy pre-production in composing the scene through storyboarding, 2D animation, or 3D animation. So essentially, Peter Jackson had to sit with storyboard artists or CG artists and prep ahead of time how they wanted to shoot the entire scene, and then arrive on set and actually shoot it. The troll here is very impressive, as computer-generated images back in the 90s were still kind of an uncanny valley. That's really why we see Gollum in darkness in the previous scene. The filmmakers at the time were still developing the tools for Gollum, and they were still testing out the early computer-generated technology that Weta was inventing. Let's not forget the size of the hobbits. The actors themselves that play the characters have a normal height, and a lot of stunt doubles had to be brought in order to shoot the scenes with the other larger characters. So a lot of pre-planning needed to happen with these shots, which angles we needed to take, when we needed to hide the actors or show the actors. Obviously there are a few mistakes, like the hobbits here not warning Frodo that the troll is coming his way, but this is impressive regardless. And Frodo gets stabbed. Everyone thinks he's dead, except us, since we already know that Bilbo gave him the mithril, and since he's the protagonist, there's no way the filmmakers will kill him off this quickly. They hear more orcs coming, and so Gandalf orders them to the bridge of Khazad-dûm. The great realm of the dwarf city of Dwarodelf is a very impressive miniature, or bigature. Lord of the Rings utilized this technique very effectively and developed it and perfected it. However, this has been around during the first days of filmmaking, and it probably has some origin with Georges Méliès, who was one of the first filmmakers to experiment with fantasy and magic inside of film. So the filmmakers like to call these bigatures, but essentially they are just large miniatures that are extremely detailed. The entire trilogy is designed this way, and it really adds more realism to these shots. However, when the filmmakers upgraded these films to 4K, they had to go back and touch up some of these effects since they were now being screened in much more detail. One example of this is blurring out the faces of the stunts that played the hobbits. So they run through the Great Hall, and this is a terrific series of shots since it builds up tension, since the orcs increase in amount. This is also a good example of using primitive CGI. By keeping the creatures in darkness, we are able to sell the realism more. Weta Digital is a VFX and SFX company that did Lord of the Rings, Avatar, and no, The Hobbit is not part of this world. I refuse to acknowledge its existence. I believe they invented the program called Massive, which simulates all these CGI characters and big battle sequences. Before, all of these characters would need to be animated manually, frame by frame essentially. And so filmmakers would need to get a lot of extras or employ an army or spend a lot of money. Now, the characters could react independently with specific movements being decided ahead of time. They would program them to fight, fly, or die inside the simulation. The Fellowship is cornered and we arrive to a mini crisis in the scene. Weta also displays these excellent makeup and prosthetics. This company basically built its entire portfolio on this film, by the way. And so the rising action is suddenly interrupted by a more horrifying complication, and this is clearly expressed through Gandalf giving payoff to the previous foreshadowing that he must be tested against his most powerful enemy or foe. The staircase scene, as I'm gonna call it, along with the next scene at the bridge, is probably one of the best examples of building tension in cinema. These models and sets are so impressive and detailed, along with the music and shot choices really makes this a very gripping scene the first time you see it. So they arrive to their first challenge. Legolas jumps off first, thereby showing us the physical strength of the elves. The film raises the stakes with the arrival of the orcs firing arrows at them. Gimli adds some comic relief with his arrogance and interaction with Legolas, and the film raises the stakes once more by enlarging the separation in the staircase, leaving Frodo and Aragorn trapped. The Balrog creates a reversal, thereby portraying one of the major themes in Lord of the Rings in such a subtle way that it almost gets unnoticed. This will be something we can discuss in Return of the King if we ever get there, but the basic idea here is that only evil can undo evil. This is one of the founding philosophies of Lord of the Rings and stems from Tolkien's experiences with war. The Balrog here causes the staircase to sway, reuniting Aragorn and Frodo with the rest of the clan, evil undoing evil and creating good. This philosophy happens at the climax of Return of the King when Frodo fails on his quest to throw the ring into Mount Doom and fights with Gollum to claim power over it. The ring's own evil nature led to its downfall. Back to the Fellowship. The action dies off slightly with the gang descending the staircase, Howard Shore upstaging everyone with his epic score, again the interplay of light and dark, only for Gandalf to come face to face with the Balrog. The gang crosses the bridge, and this is great CGI that still holds up to this day, and I actually never knew that the Fellowship here was also CGI'd. This forces Gandalf to hold his ground and face off with the Balrog.
You cannot pass!
I don't think anyone could have set these lines better than Sir Ian. There could not have been a better casting for this character, really. Impressive sequence as well that brings the entire second act to its most climactic point. It follows the typical Hollywood rule of threes in portraying the interplay between light and dark. So Gandalf lights up his staff, this is the first light element. The Balrog delivers the first hit and fails, this is the first dark element. Gandalf orders him to go back, the second light element. The Balrog takes a step forward and threatens Gandalf, this is the second dark element. Ian kills it with this line,
You shall not pass!
hitting his staff against the bridge and weakening its structure. This is the third light element at play. And the Balrog steps forward and falls, the third dark element failing against the light, or so we thought. The Balrog's whip grabs onto Gandalf's leg and forces him over the edge, thereby completing the third dark element.
Fly, you fools!
The death of Gandalf, in my opinion, is one of the strongest scenes in cinema, if only it wasn't undermined by the reappearance of this character in the second film. Frodo and Gandalf share eye contact here, paying off the scene we had with them before. Instead of asking for help, Gandalf essentially makes the choice here to let go, saving the Fellowship before the orcs arrive. This scene, along with Boromir's, is another reason why I think the Fellowship of the Ring is the best out of the trilogy. It sets up the stakes as being very high since we lose two of our main characters, one of which is essentially the leader of the Fellowship. And I'm sure everyone was glad that Sauron, the biggest evil, Saruman, the second biggest evil dude, Denethor, the third biggest evil dude, Gollum, who's honestly the leading antagonist of the other two films in my opinion, and these other evil characters that were killed off. Sure, we had some good guys die, but those don't really count in relation to this. And Frodo's departure in the Grey Haven scene doesn't really count either, since it's portrayed in a more hopeful mood. You know, we should be happy for him since he's going there to essentially end his suffering. And ours, honestly, since we experienced 9 hours of him of being depressed. Which is the point, obviously. But anyways, I think the filmmakers could have kept Gandalf dead and moved away from the books, allowing Aragorn to step into his shoes, strengthening the point that he must step into a leadership position since he becomes the king later on. But when Gandalf is brought back, Aragorn's time on screen diminishes. This would also highlight another theme that Lord of the Rings explores in its climactic scene, whereby almost all of the characters have or are about to fail at their goal. Frodo fails to destroy the ring, Sam fails at stopping Frodo, Gollum technically wins but dies because of it, so in a sense he failed. Sauron fails to stop the ring from being destroyed, Aragorn is failing against the troll, Gandalf is about to fail, this is why he shouldn't even be here, and neither should this Deus Ex Machina, but we'll go into these another time. Legolas is failing, Gimli is a question mark, so are Merry and Pippin, Saruman's already dead, and you get the idea. Barely anyone succeeds with what they were set out to do, it is only when the ring is destroyed by its own evil nature that all these characters get to live happily ever after. By returning Gandalf, his arc is weakened. Actually, he almost doesn't develop at all in the other films, while in this one he's introduced to us first as this.
Want it for yourself!
Bilbo Baggins! Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks. I am not trying to rob you.
This funny looking wizard with a pointy hat does fireworks and magic tricks, and by the end we find out that he can essentially win against a mortifying creature 5 times his size. He sacrifices himself for the Fellowship, like Boromir and King Theoden, and by bringing him back in the other films, his sacrifice here becomes meaningless. And of course, we can't wrap up this video without appreciating Howard Shore's score in this scene, which captures, I think, the impact of Gandalf's death on the Fellowship. I'm out of time for today, but I think we can wrap up Act 3 in 2 more videos, hopefully. I'll see you guys next week with more content about Lord of the Rings, and as always, thank you for watching.